Whoa, it's the Illusion, reporting from somewhere on Spaceship Earth. I read a book, first book of 2025, in the head, yo. So I read Erik Larson's The Demon of Unrest. It's about Fort Sumter. I always want to add a P in there. Fort Sumter. And so if you know, I'm a big fan of Erik Larson's work. He's kind of this genre of nonfiction historical writers that write with a fictional narrative vibe, if you will. So it's a page turner, man. It's a page turner. I mean, we know the outcome of Fort Sumter, right? And but this makes it into like a suspenseful novel, getting to when Fort Sumter is finally surrendered to the Confederates there, and it gets all into it. I mean, let's start with my complaint. My complaint about this book is there's no pictures and there's no real maps. And it's something that Erik Larson's does and his publishers. You guys need to start putting some more maps in here. This is the only map you get, which is the bay at Charleston Harbor. And no pictures of any of the key players. I mean, I had to go do my own. It's nice to see what people actually look like. And yeah, it's always disappointing, no maps in historical books and no pictures. I mean, I guess I don't know why, dude. It's weird. But that's my only real complaint about it. So the way the book is written is basically you get little 2-3 page chapters that kind of switch back and forth from the Confederates to the Union to to what's going on in the fort with Major Anderson and the garrison there. And what's interesting again is I don't think people delve enough into the Civil War of our country and really get into like what a profound battle of ideas and the Constitution and the concept of property is all about. I mean, I will say when I finished this book, I was sort of sad. It's just sort of sad because you're reading when the South is seceding from the Union. Both North and South don't think there's going to be a big, giant, bloody war. They really think, the South really thinks it's justified to leave the Union. And the North pretty much thinks that the South is just going to come crawling back, basically. But the South is determined. The South is determined. They think that cotton is king, that the world can't get by without their cotton. And I don't think they were ready for Lincoln was not going to let it go down that way. And you really do get into the how there was sort of this slow roll, this just slow thing, and then so I mean what you really get about it is just how invested the South was into this concept of slavery and how much they just were going to dig their feet into it. There was really no way out of it. I think that's ultimately when you read this and you really start studying the Civil War, there was no way out of it. In fact, I think in one of Lincoln's speeches that they reference in here, he talks about like this is the great test of the Constitution, and the American Revolution was to see if we could survive this thing. And in Lincoln's mind, letting go of the southern states and allowing slavery to continue would be an absolute failure of the ideas of the Constitution. And it really does bring home the fact that slavery was unfinished business, and the framers of the Constitution knew this when they had the Constitutional Convention and they wrote it all out. That is what the Great Compromise was ultimately about. And this problem wasn't going to go anywhere. And so when it finally gets down to its situation, you really get into this sort of thing about how the North refused to acknowledge the South's government and its governmental people that the government sent up to negotiate with the North. The North refused to acknowledge it because the North never would acknowledge them as a country. They were always in a state of rebellion. And so you get into this interesting sort of behind the scenes of the political maneuvering about the temperament of the two factions, the North and the South. And you also get sort of perspective about the people that, you have all these, they were called fire eaters, dude. The fire eaters were the really pro-secessionists. And then you had the abolitionists to the North, which were pro, like really invested in the anti-slavery movement. And it's a very interesting thing because the Union, why Fort Sumter is so important is because the Union will not let it go because it views it as property of the Union. And it's not going to let them have the fort in Charleston Harbor. And what's interesting on that, the flip side, is the South is not going to give up their slaves because they view them as property. And it really digs into the fact that Lincoln was willing to allow the South to kind of keep their slaves as long as they didn't leave the Union. And the South was really like super uptight about the fact that their property wasn't being returned to them when the slave would leave to the North. And then it really does get into the fact that, that a lot of people that were in the South, like, for example, Robert E. Lee, he was anti-slavery, but he wasn't going to turn his back against Virginia, who voted to secede. And it gets all into each state seceding from the Union and their little conventions they had to vote to secede. And it's just a very interesting book. And again, I think it gets into there was no way out. There was the North, which viewed all men are created equal and the constitutional rights. And then there was the South, which viewed the slaves as property. And what I think that's very interesting that when you really read up on the Civil War is both the North and the South believed that they had God's blessings. And the South believed that they were biblically correct to own slavery, and it was their right, and it was actually a humane system. and the North believed that God was on their side to free the slaves because of that all men were created in God's image. And so you get into this very interesting thing about like what is property and what are people and what is humanity and what's it all about. And so yeah, it's like it's a lot, it's about states' rights, it's about the right to leave the Union. And you really dig into the fact that if the southern states were leaving the Union for the sake of seceding and it didn't involve slavery, would it there have been required to have this civil war? And we really get into this. And the interesting thing is, it's basically 4 years from the date that Fort Sumter is surrendered to the Confederates till it is given back, till the Union wins it back. And it's a 4-year anniversary from the time that the American flag is taken down till it's raised back up again. And I don't know, you just get this. You just get this thing because you already know the outcome. And you're reading about people and how they viewed that there was some sort of romanticized nature to what was coming. They had yet to lose everything. And North and South alike, man, you know, when you really get into the amount of lives lost and souls damaged and the carnage, and you really read about the hubris and how people were just gung-ho for this thing, gung-ho for this civil war. And there is just sort of you really do read, like this book does really help to illustrate that there was just an inevitability to it, that there was no way out, that that the factions had dug in so hard on either side. And there's people trying, because it's all around the fall of Fort Sumter, but the whole book's about what leads up to that moment. And you really get into the fact that there were a lot of people, even Seward and Lincoln's cabinet, were trying to find a way out of it, man. Trying to find a way out of the war. And it's interesting because they're willing to compromise on a certain level about slavery. And I think that that's one thing that you know, when everyone tries to glorify the Union, they weren't the abolitionists. And then when people really slam on the American thing, I really don't think they truly understand the abolitionists and how people put their lives on the line to free the slaves. And it was because the founding fathers had given them the mechanism to do it, right? Like if the Constitution hadn't been laid out the way it was, I don't know if it would have gone that way. I mean, again, is you know, ultimately slavery was going to just economically spin itself out eventually, but the tools were put in place where this thing could happen, but it wasn't going to go down without a fight. I think that's what I find to be sad about this book is they access this woman's diary, who kept a diary through the whole thing, before, during, and like after it. And you really get the flavor of if they had known how bad it was gonna go, would they have done what they would have done? I don't know, man. They hate it. The animosity. I think that this gives you a lens into where we're at now as a nation. There are some very non-budging issues that are involve the concept of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that either side refuses to acknowledge is real. And I think that when I read a book like this, it gives me a deeper lens on just how messed up things are for the human condition. Like the people of the South, the chivalry as they called themselves, really the planters, the aristocracy of the South, really believed in all their heart and soul that they were doing the right thing, man. Which is weird. It's just such a, but you really read it, get a lens into the weird nature of the culture around slavery. And I think that's something we don't get enough, we don't look into enough, is just the weird culture that had been around it. And the fact that it wasn't as cut and dry as they make it out to be, that it was just some line across the country and like one half was like anti-slavery and the other half was pro-slavery. It wasn't quite that simple. The North wasn't that clear about it. The abolitionists were no doubt super clear about it, but the mechanism of the political machinery of the North would have been willing to compromise in a big way, but the South wasn't willing to compromise. They were like all or nothing. Because yeah, it's again, I highly recommend. It's a page turner, dude. That's why you're getting a pretty quick review after the one I put up, man. I think I knocked this thing down in like 6 weeks, dude. It's a page turner. It's really well written. I'm a huge fan of Erik Larson. He's done a bunch of other novels of nonfiction novels, dude. And I highly recommend it. All right, this is The Illusion, and go get some Demon Unrest, The Demon of Unrest. I'll put a link down below, and you can order one from my Prime account. If not, man, put a PayPal link and get some t-shirts, or just go pick up a book and read, and use the name tags out there, man.